Coca-Cola sold over 2 billion servings yesterday. Almost none were made by Coca-Cola. The trucks delivering cans to your grocery store aren't Coca-Cola trucks. The plant that bottled the drink isn't a Coca-Cola plant. What Coca-Cola actually makes is a secret brown syrup concentrate shipped from a small number of facilities to roughly 225 independent bottling companies who add the water, the carbonation, and the packaging, run the trucks, and pay Coca-Cola for the right to do it. This arrangement was invented in 1899 when two lawyers from Chattanooga talked Coca-Cola's owner into signing over perpetual bottling rights for the entire United States for $1. This is the story of how giving away the hard part of the business became one of the most profitable decisions in consumer goods history. The bottlers don't just handle distribution, they absorb every capital cost in the chain. The plants, the equipment, the trucks, the labor force that runs all of it. Everything between the syrup and the shelf belongs to them. Coca-Cola owns almost none of it. The margins reflect the split. Coca-Cola's operating margin runs around 30%. Their largest bottling partners run between 8 and 12. The same bottle of Coke generates significantly more profit per dollar of revenue for the company that made the syrup than for the company that manufactured, packaged, and delivered the actual drink. That is not an accident. That is the model. What Coca-Cola understood more than a century before anyone named it is that the high-margin part of a beverage business isn't the beverage, it's the brand and the formula. Everything downstream is commodity work, capital-intensive, complex to run, and unable to command margins that come from owning something no competitor can copy. So they kept the irreplaceable part and gave the rest away. The same pattern shows up in most of the companies people now call asset-light. Uber doesn't own the cars, Airbnb doesn't own the rooms, Apple doesn't own the factories. The bottlers absorbed the capital risk and the operational complexity for a fraction of Coca-Cola's margin. For over a century, hundreds of independent companies fought for the chance to take that deal. The ones who got in early built generational fortunes, but the same contract contained one clause that would eventually turn Coca-Cola's own bottlers into the company's biggest problem. The two lawyers were named Benjamin Thomas and Joseph Whitehead. They approached Asa Candler, the Atlanta businessman who had acquired Coca-Cola and its formula in the late 1880s, with a simple proposal: let them bottle it. Candler was skeptical. In 1899, Coca-Cola was a fountain drink, bought at a drugstore counter, mixed on the spot, served in a glass. The idea of sealing it in a bottle and shipping it across the country seemed like a marginal experiment. He signed the contract without demanding much for it. The contract gave Thomas and Whitehead perpetual bottling rights for nearly every state in America. The price was $1, and the concentrate price Coca-Cola could charge the bottlers was fixed, not indexed to inflation, not adjustable by negotiation. For the next half-century, this looked like a reasonable arrangement for everyone. Coca-Cola grew beyond anything Candler had imagined. The bottlers grew with it. Families who held territorial rights in major markets built fortunes across generations. The deal Candler had barely thought twice about became one of the most valuable franchises in commercial history. Coca-Cola benefited too. They never had to build factories or manage distribution networks. They focused on the brand, the marketing, the formula, the parts that scaled without capital. When Pepsi tried to compete in the early decades of the 20th century, they had to construct their own bottling infrastructure from scratch. Coca-Cola already had hundreds of independent operators covering the country. The franchise network was a competitive moat that took Pepsi decades to partially match. But the fixed concentrate price had a problem embedded in it from the start. Candler had set it in 1899. By the 1970s, inflation had eroded its real value to the point where Coca-Cola was effectively subsidizing its own bottlers. The arrangement that had freed them from capital costs was now costing them margin on every case produced. They needed the contract back. Getting meaningful control would take over a decade of contentious negotiations. By the late 1970s, the fixed concentrate price had become Coca-Cola's central financial problem, but the contracts were legally airtight. A 1921 federal court ruling had already established that the perpetual bottling rights were binding. Coca-Cola couldn't terminate the agreements. They had to convince hundreds of independent bottlers to voluntarily surrender terms that had made them wealthy. It took nearly a decade. A 1978 amendment allowed Coca-Cola to tie concentrate pricing to sugar costs and inflation, the first meaningful break from the original fixed structure. The 1987 master bottler contract finalized the broader restructuring. 88 years after Candler signed away pricing control for $1, Coca-Cola had recovered it. The contract was only part of the problem. The bottler network had fragmented. Hundreds of independent operators ran at wildly different scales, with quality and coverage to match. So through the 1980s, Coca-Cola started buying them outright. Between 1980 and 1986, they consolidated dozens of independent operators, then spun the combined entity off as Coca-Cola Enterprises, a publicly traded company in which Coca-Cola held a minority stake. The structure let them set operational standards and exercise strategic control without absorbing the capital costs onto their own balance sheet. The asset-light logic that had defined the company since 1899 was preserved. The control problem was solved by financial engineering. That pattern hasn't stopped. For the next 3 decades, Coca-Cola alternated between consolidating bottlers and refranchising them, buying when control mattered more, selling back when capital efficiency did. In 2024 and 2025, Coca-Cola has refranchised major bottling operations in Africa and India, selling stakes to large regional partners while the concentrate revenue keeps flowing upstream. Every business has parts that scale and parts that don't. Manufacturing scales linearly. Every additional unit costs roughly what the last one cost. Brands and formulas scale at zero marginal cost. Every additional customer is pure margin. The companies that win the longest games figure out which side of that line they're on, and they own one side completely while giving the other side away. Coca-Cola figured this out in 1899. They sold $1 worth of bottling rights and kept the syrup. 126 years later, they're still selling syrup, the bottlers are still bottling, and every asset-light company built since, Uber, Airbnb, Apple, Visa, is running a version of the same trade. Coca-Cola doesn't make Coke. They make the part that scales.